Today we're going to be working on a 2005 Chrysler Town Country. We're going to be doing the rear brake pads. Got the car in park, got the wheels chalked on the front. We're going to get this rear end jacked up. If you don't have an impact gun, you're going to want to loosen these lug nuts on the ground. Otherwise, go ahead and get it jacked up. We'll get these tires off. We can get our first look at how thick those pads are. They're not all the way gone. These were not squealing, but I'm getting ready to go on vacation, so I was checking this and I'm like, well, they're pretty low, so it's time to replace. So looking in here, you can see on the right is the caliper piston. I can see a little bit of the dust boot there. Then the first pad, then the liner, the rotors in the middle, then the other pad and the other metal part of the shoe. You've got the caliper up on top. You've got the rotor here. This rotor is still held on by one of these little washers. You see that one doesn't have it. That one does. That little washer is completely unnecessary. That's just something they use at the factory to hold this rotor on while it's going down the assembly line. You're going to want to take a look at your rotor, see if it's got any really deep or bad grooves in it. This is one side. There are some scratches. None of those are really deep grooves, but eventually we'll get it off of there and we'll measure the thickness. Now what you can see here is a little rubber cap. Inside that rubber cap is a hex head. I think it's 7mm. I'll confirm that here in a minute. But there's a hex head bolt in there. They call it a caliper pin. You can see that caliper pin right there. And this entire caliper slides in and out on those pins. As the pads wear, that's going to move just a little bit. But there's two of these caliper pins. We're going to have to pop both of those off. Here's this one, and then this one. I actually have the caliper pins loose back here, but really before you loosen those, you want to take a screwdriver, stick it in here like this, and apply a little pressure to the shoe, and that will push that caliper pin back in. That'll give you the room that you need, the slack that you need to go ahead and pull this caliper up and off of that rotor. I've got an Allen or a hex head, 7mm, and that's going to go right in here. Drops inside there. Going to get this one out, get the other one out, then this entire caliper will lift it up and off and support it out of the way, probably laying it over here on the leaf spring. If I'm going straight on with the bolt, I know which way is lefty, which way is righty. But if I'm going to be doing this backwards, I'll usually just take this, make sure I'm going the right direction, get that in there. Then I'm more confident that I can lean on this. It wasn't very tight at all. Get this other one cracked loose over here. We'll get those all the way pulled out here. Now I gave these caliper pins a bunch of turns and eventually they come loose, but they don't really like back out. So if you want to, you can take a screwdriver, gently get in there and touch the threads, and you'll see that that bolt is actually loose. So I'm going to do that to the other one over here. And now this caliper, once you've got those two caliper pins kind of pushed back so they're not touching the threads that they're going into, then this whole caliper is now loose. You notice you've got this piece right here, it goes up and under here, so you're not going to be able to lift this thing straight up, but it will basically tip back and come up. So now I'm flipping this thing all the way back and laying it here on the leaf spring. So here's a little different angle of that. So lift this up, flip her straight back, then just lay it down on this leaf spring. If you want to be extra careful, you could take a coat hanger, wrap around that caliper to make sure it doesn't, fall off of there. A lot of people get really excited about, letting the caliper hang from the brake hose. You especially don't want to let it fall off of there and give it a big jerk. That's the worst thing you can do. So as I don't get any haters, I'm going to get a little baling wire, put just a quick wrap, make sure that caliper is not going to go anywhere. Now since this little washer is still on there, we're going to have to get a pick, screwdriver, pair of pliers, something, get that little washer to come off of there. Again, that thing is not needed for some crazy reason. I always just put it back on. 5 years later I take the thing back off, whatever. Get that son of a gun off there. Alright, some engineer's evil scheme to frustrate people. It took a lot of doing, but somehow only Honda could come up with a more evil plan. They put two special Phillips screws to hold this thing on that tend to get rusted in there and are a real pain in the ass. But this thing, it's being a pain in the ass, but it's going to come off. So just keep twisting, turning, ripping, whatever. Again, it's a piece of trash and ain't going back on. There it is, the evil washer. Now at this point, if you're lucky, this rotor will be loose, and in this case it is. I'm the last guy who had this off, and I put anti-seize in behind it so that it would not rust weld itself to the axle. But if it were, you can take a hammer and bang around on it a little bit and usually get that to kind of free up and loosen up. Now this is a special case here where you've got some little brake shoes inside of here that are for your park brake, and you've got your caliper squeezing on the pads. But if you had your park brake on, this thing would not budge. So make sure you don't have your park brake on, and then go ahead and wiggle and pull and get this to come off. You can see in behind here you got your shoes, kind of like the old drum brakes, but that's just for your park brake. Those rarely ever wear out unless you're doing something crazy like stopping with your park brakes so you don't, burn out your brake lights or something. But anyway, that's the scoop there. This is really a pretty slick system. You don't have to take this caliper bracket loose to get the rotor off. Most other cars, or a bunch of other cars, you do. I just did a Honda the other day. A ton of cars, you got to take a couple of big bolts off in the back, get this whole caliper bracket to come loose, and then you can get the rotor off. But this one, rotor comes right off without anything special. So here you can see the caliper with the two pads are still in it. You've got your guide pins are here. You can see that the caliper piston is pushed out, and this is a dust boot right here. It's just keeping dust from getting inside of here and messing with the seal. There's a metal piston that pushes out, and there's a seal about right in here. The dust boot just keeps it all clean in here. You've got your inner pad. The inner pad is held in by some little metal brackets that go inside. I can't get it quite all the way out here because the outer pad's still in the way. But you can see those brackets so that it kind of snaps in there. This outer pad is pushed over the caliper, and these two brackets here are holding that pad onto the caliper. It's kind of hard. You can get in here and you can pry these off, but since you know this is going to be trash, if you want to, you can just stick your screwdriver in here and just give these things a real good torque, get them bent kind of out of the way. Then that's going to make it a lot easier to get it off of there. I've got this caliper sitting on an old cooler here just so I don't put stress on this brake hose. Then I'm going to work on getting this outer shoe off of there. So I'm going to take a regular sized hammer. Once you got them kind of broke loose from any rust, you got these things bent out of the way a little bit. Now with a little bit of force or maybe some prying, you'll eventually get that pad up and out of there. Okay, there she goes finally. Okay. So there's that outer pad. Again, I was pretty aggressive on these two hold down clips. Later you're going to put the new ones in here, and then with a fair amount of force they'll clip in there and snap on. And you can see there's some little round pin there and a slot there, and those are eventually going to go far enough down, and with the spring pressure here they will lock into place. Then this inner pad pops out of there. Last time I put these on, I put some red anti-squeak silicone on there. But one thing we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and put this pad back in, and we're going to get the tool to allow us to push that caliper piston back inside the caliper, which is going to give us the room we need for the new thicker pads. Before we get real crazy about compressing those caliper pistons back in, that's going to force fluid back up into the brake fluid reservoir here. We don't want to overflow that and have fluid get all over the place, so you want to take that cap off, get yourself like a turkey baster, get in there, and you want to make sure you don't contaminate anything, but take and suck out some of this fluid and put it into a clean plastic jug. Now I've got a little plastic jug down here that I'm squirting that into. You want to try and avoid getting this all over the place. Definitely don't want to get it on your paint job, because brake fluid will damage your paint. So suck a little bit out of there. You don't have to suck a lot, but it never hurts to kind of do a kind of a brake fluid flush. So if you suck all of it out of there, that's cool. So I've sucked out quite a bit there. So we're just going to replace that with fresh fluid when we're done. Go ahead and set the cap back on there. Just don't tighten it all the way. For years I used to just take a big old C-clamp, put that on there, use this C-clamp to slowly and gently push that piston back in. That's one way to do it. They also make nifty little tools that slide in there and allow you to turn them, and they'll push that back in for you. So either way, we're going to go ahead and push that piston all the way back in. Before I do that though, I'm going to spray a little bit of brake clean on here and get that cleaned up just a little bit, and then I like to spray a little silicone spray on that boot before I smash it back in there. Now I've got the caliper sitting in a pan. I'm going to go ahead and take a little brake clean. Clean it up just a little bit before I shove that dust boot back inside the caliper. It's not really very dirty, so just a little bit of cleaning there. This stuff evaporates real quick. I don't know why I do this, but then I usually get a little heavy-duty silicone spray and I lubricate that dust boot a little bit. And now I'm going to go ahead and drive that piston all the way back in. It's going in nice and smooth. If you feel any kind of great resistance here, you might have some damage to the caliper piston. Might be time for a new caliper. Should not take very much force at all to push this in. You don't have to drive it all the way in, but pretty close. Now you're ready to pull this inner pad out. Got some of that, basically that red silicone, some anti-squeak stuff that I'd put on the pad before installing it last time. Get that cleaned up just a little bit. Now we're going to go ahead and push these pins out. They should come out of there fairly smooth. This one does not have a lot of grease on it. If you need to, you can replace these. You can kind of push this little rubber down and this whole thing will just push on out, and you can then force in some new rubber guides. But basically it feels pretty good and tight. I didn't notice any major wiggle when this thing was on here. The pads are worn evenly. Everything looks good. So if one pad was worn more than the other, you might suspect that your caliper piston was hanging up a little bit. If the pads were worn kind of side to side, you might think that these guide pins were loose and you were getting a little bit of a cockeyed action when you're putting on the brakes. But everything here looked even and good, so we're going to reuse these. We're just going to grease them. Here's that 7mm hex head there. You should take a nylon brush and a little bit of brake clean. Clean those out a little bit. If you had air, you could blow it out now. You want to inspect this pin, make sure it's not rusted and pitted. Make sure that it feels nice and smooth. Get it cleaned off a little bit. And then we're going to lubricate it with some high temp brake caliper type lubricant. They make a lot of different kinds of this, but we're going to go ahead and lube this one up. Slide her back in the hole. Got it nice and lubed up. Slide her back in there, give it a little spin. Everything feels good. Okay, now we'll go on and do the other one. Looks good, no rust, no pitting. Feels nice and smooth, so we'll clean her up a little brake clean. Clean her up. Let that dry for a second while we go ahead and get this cleaned off and lubed up. If you do have a little bit of rust on that pin, you can take it over to the wire wheel, buff that off. Did give it just a little bit on the wire wheel, take just some off. No big deal. Get that reinstalled in here. Give it some twists and turns. Make sure it's sliding in and out real easy. Should be good to go. Just got back from AutoZone. Traded my old pads in. Got some new ones. Covered under warranty. These were lifetime warranted. A lot of people don't believe it, but you know, there's 75,000 miles on the old pads. Been installed since 2010. They wore out. They're lifetime guaranteed. You take them in there, they trade them in, you get new ones. So these didn't cost me anything. The new pads did come with new hardware, so you get those new rubber guide pin things. When he opened the box, the grease was missing, so he gave me a couple packets of high temp grease there for brakes. So let's get to putting these back on. Since the replacement pads came with new guides and grease, I guess we'll go ahead and replace these. Might as well. If I had two hands, I wasn't trying to stay out of the way of the camera, I could do this a little faster, but I'm trying to give you a good shot. Anyway, just get those boogers out of there. We'll lube the new ones up and shove them in. Just a little something I picked up on the other side. If you want to just get a utility knife, box cutter, just come in here and cut that end off. Then just grab it in the back with your pliers. It'll just pull right out of there. take just a little bit of the grease. Grease the inside of these, so hopefully those new ones will slide right in there. I'm going to go ahead and take these new ones and put a fair amount of grease down inside there. Then go ahead and get them put in. All the way in there. Okay, pop through on the other side, so we're good. Do that other one. Yeah, it's a little bit of a fight to get them in there. Definitely want to put a little lube like I did in there so that they want to slide on in. Go ahead and get that pin good and lubed up. Work it into those new sleeves. Do a little spinning. Works back and forth real easy. I know I'm going to take some heat for doing this, but I would recommend that basically you buy new rotors. They're not that expensive, you know, 30 bucks a piece, something like that. Get new rotors. In my case, I measured them. They're still doing pretty good. There's some scratches. They're not too deep. So I'm just going to take my old automotive body grinder. Just work my way around very carefully, kind of making sure that I can see the same scratchy pattern all the way across, and just kind of take this little edge off of here and a little edge off if there's any here. Just rough these up a little bit. Again, I would recommend you go out and you buy new ones, take them in, have them measured. You're going to want to take a wire brush, clean out in here. Where this mates up with the axle, where you got the stud sticking out, you want that to fit nice and flush. So you're going to want to go into that axle as well and clean up around all those studs. You want to do this because you don't want any rust in here to maybe stick out a couple thousandths of an inch over here, and then the next thing you know, this rotor is wobbling a couple thousandths of an inch. So clean these out real good. While you're in here, you want to check your bearing. If there's any obvious problem, you'd probably feel it. But really no slack here. Turns easy. Parking brake shoes all look good, so that's cool. So now I'm going to take just a little coating of anti-seize and just coat this up. That way, if in another 85,000 and 5 to 6 years I've still got this car, then maybe the rotor will pop off of there without beating the crap out of it. So just a very thin coating. We'll go ahead and slip this rotor back on. That's on there. Now, instead of using that stupid little washer, we're just going to run one nut down on here. Now, sometimes the threads might not be good down here, so you might have to put a little washer under there if this doesn't want to go on all the way, but I'll get that screwed on. Let's go ahead and get the pads back in this caliper, so we'll go ahead and just push these threads all the way in. And then with some clean hands, we're going to go ahead and put this pad in. It's got the little clips. I've installed just the tiniest little bit of anti-seize on there. Sometimes I coat the back of these with some red silicone anti-squeak stuff, but I don't think that's necessary here for the back. So go ahead and put this in there. Get those little clips to pop in. Now here you've got the other pad. It's got to go on like this. So we note that there's a round peg there and kind of a oblong peg there. Those are going to drop in slots. Nothing special in there, just round holes. But this has got to go here, and then you've got to apply some pretty good force to get these clips to slide over the top here. Now with some clean hands, you want to go ahead and get this shoe on there. It's a little bit of a pain because you got to get these clips to slide over these, and then you got to get a couple things to drop down into these two holes. If you tip it back a little bit, kind of cock it backwards, push on one side, you can kind of get it to come up over the edge there, so that's good. There's the trick. They're not seated yet, so I got to keep pushing it in till it clicks. I can see right here that I'm not in there yet. And I can actually, if I can shine a light down in here. On the right, I'm in. Over here, it's still sticking up above. So we need just a little tap here. Still somehow missed it. Now these surfaces where the shoes are going to slide, we put just a little touch of grease in there, and they're going to run back and forth up in here. So we'll put just a little bit of grease right up in here. Let's try our luck getting this caliper slipped back on. Want to make sure this little piece has to go underneath there. So we're going to have to tip it up, put that underneath there, then flop it back down. Actually, back in here, I didn't get any grease where that shoe's going to slide, so I'm going to add just a little bit more there. Okay, we're in good shape. This little bar is underneath. We've got some grease on the surfaces where those shoes are going to slide. They don't slide very much. Now we're ready to tighten those two pins in the back with that 7mm hex. Some people always ask, do I have to bleed the brakes after I do this? The answer is no. We haven't done anything to do with loosening this bleeder screw. We haven't replaced the hose. Nothing that broke into the actual internal hydraulic system. We do want to be careful that we go ahead and add some fluid back to the reservoir for the brakes before we pump them, because we did suck quite a bit out of there, so we don't want to push any air into the system. So that's the only concern there, is make sure you fill that up before you go ahead and start pumping these to push these pistons back out. I'm going to go back here, wiggle this around, start it by hand, make sure you're definitely going in. Before you get this one tight, go over to the other side, wiggle it around. You'll kind of feel it drop in. Make sure you can turn by hand. Then you can go ahead grab your wrench, get these snugged down. Want to make sure you got them both going in pretty good. We'll just barely snug down one side, then we'll snug down the other, and then we're going to torque them. So I got that one snug down. That one snug down. Now we're going to torque them. You can go ahead and look up your torque spec. I'm going to go, those are pretty decent size, about 35 foot-pounds. Alright, it's all done. You want to kind of do a little check, make sure, yeah, I remember tightening these. Brake hose looks good. If you got any fingerprints on the rotor, might want to take a little brake clean, a paper towel, clean that up. Basically, that's it. So, put the tire back on. We're done with this side. Okay, we're all done. We have not got in and pumped the brakes yet. We want to go ahead and fill this up because we sucked quite a bit out of here, and if we got in there now and pumped it, there's a slight chance we could put air in the system. So definitely want to go ahead, add some fluid back in here first. Dot 3. Get in, we're going to pump the brakes. We're not going to let our foot go all the way to the floor. If you want to, you might want to put a 2x4 underneath the brake. You don't want to go all the way to the floor because you're going to push the master cylinder past where it's used to going. There's a very slight chance that you might mess up one of the seals or the plungers. Not a big deal. Some people get all crazy about it. Good idea though, just lightly pump it. Not all the way to the floor, just a few light pumps. Push the pistons out, get those back pads seated against the rotors.